He thought it would be just another routine night raid, quiet, quick, without risk. Inside the house slept a woman and her child, but only seconds after the breach, everything went wrong. They had no idea who was waiting for them on the other side of that door. It was Ronda Rousey. Subscribe so you don't miss the next stories, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. The night hung quietly over the hills outside Los Angeles, the kind of silence that only comes when the air is warm, still and heavy with the scent of pine. Inside her home, Ronda Rousey moved with the same precision she had once carried into the octagon. Every motion had rhythm and intent. The lights were dim, the hum of the refrigerator steady, the faint ticking of a clock cutting through the stillness like the soft beat of a metronome. Her daughter Laya was finishing her last bit of homework at the kitchen table, her small hand holding a pencil with exaggerated seriousness. Ronda leaned over her shoulder, reading the uneven handwriting on the page. The words made her smile, messy but confident, just like the girl who wrote them. "You did great," she said quietly, brushing a stray lock of hair behind Laya's ear. The girl looked up and grinned, proud of herself. In that moment, Ronda felt something she hadn't known for most of her fighting years. Peace. She'd lived through chaos, roaring arenas, blinding lights, screaming crowds, blood and sweat under fluorescent glare. But here, in this modest house on the edge of the valley, peace was a living thing, fragile but real. She moved to the window and looked out. The moon was rising behind the hills and the street was empty. Her neighbors' lights were off, the world asleep. She double-checked the security monitor above the door. All cameras showed clear. It was habit, not paranoia. Years of military and law enforcement consulting had trained her to trust procedures more than luck. She'd installed the system herself, calibrated every angle. Even here, where crime was nearly non-existent, she believed in preparation. The last few months had reminded her why. She had left public life, stepping away from appearances and sponsorships. The attention, the constant pressure to stay visible, had worn her down. Instead, she focused on raising her daughter and doing selective contract work, training recruits, reviewing tactical programs, consulting private firms on security. One of those jobs had been for Falcon Dynamics, a defense contractor that specialized in private security and field advisory services. Ronda had spent 6 weeks training their personnel and reviewing their safety procedures. It had seemed like a straightforward assignment until she began asking questions about their accounting. She hadn't thought about Falcon for weeks, but the unease lingered. That night, it came back. At exactly 10:46 p.m., her phone vibrated. The message was brief. No caller ID. "You chose the wrong side." Ronda stared at the screen for several seconds. Her pulse didn't quicken. She'd received threats before, back when she was a fighter. But this one felt different. Impersonal yet precise, like someone reminding her of a debt she didn't know she owed. She saved the number, labeled it unknown, and deleted the message thread. Then she switched her phone to silent, set it face down, and tried to shake the feeling off. When Laya yawned, Ronda knew it was time for bed. She lifted the girl into her arms and carried her upstairs, the soft weight of her daughter grounding her more than any belt or medal ever had. In the child's room, pastel light from a night lamp painted the walls in gentle tones. Ronda tucked her in, kissed her forehead, and lingered at the door a few seconds longer than usual. Downstairs, she washed her hands, dried them carefully, and checked the locks once more. Windows sealed, back door locked, garage sensor armed. She went through the routine like a quiet ritual. The air outside was motionless, too calm. It reminded her of the final seconds before stepping into the ring, that eerie moment when the world holds its breath. In the living room, the glow of the television flickered against the walls. A late-night news anchor was discussing a developing federal investigation. The headline scrolled across the bottom of the screen. Defense contractor Falcon Dynamics under scrutiny. Her stomach tightened, but she didn't look away. The story was vague. Allegations of fraud, missing funds, unverified connections to illegal operations overseas. Ronda felt the familiar weight of instinct pressing behind her ribs. She muted the TV. Her mind replayed the message from earlier. "You chose the wrong side." She tried to reason with herself. Maybe it was random, a misdialed threat, a bot message. But deep down, she knew it wasn't. In her line of work, coincidences were rare. The timing was too exact, the words too sharp. She went upstairs to her room, the floor creaking softly beneath her bare feet. On her nightstand lay a framed photo of her and Laya at a park, both smiling, their faces lit by sunlight. That picture had gotten her through the darkest moments, the injuries, the self-doubt, the days she thought she'd lost her purpose. Now it reminded her why she had built this life of order and restraint. It wasn't fear that made her careful, it was love. Before lying down, she checked the hallway camera feed one more time. All clear. The timestamp glowed in the corner. 11:32 p.m. She dimmed the screen and turned off the lamp. Outside, the world was quiet. A car passed in the distance, its headlights sweeping briefly across the house before fading away. Rhonda's breathing slowed, but sleep didn't come easily. She stared at the ceiling, her thoughts circling back to the one thing she never admitted out loud. That peace for her was never permanent. It was always something borrowed, never owned. Half an hour later, the sound of the wind brushing against the trees made her sit up. It wasn't much, just a faint rustle, but her body reacted before her mind did. She rose silently, moved to the window, and scanned the yard. The porch lights illuminated the grass and the outline of her truck. Everything seemed normal. She exhaled slowly, forcing herself to relax. At that moment, the camera monitor blinked once. A brief static flicker, barely half a second, then another. She frowned, leaning closer. The feed returned to normal, crisp and steady, yet the unease inside her sharpened. Someone who knew systems could have caused that. A power dip? Maybe. But deep down, she didn't believe in coincidences anymore. She tried to push the worry aside. In the kitchen, she poured herself a glass of water. The clock read 12:07. She took a long drink, turned off the light, and went back to her room. Sleep finally took her around midnight, heavy and dreamless. The last thing she remembered was the rhythmic creak of the old ceiling fan. The last thing she didn't notice was a faint red dot that glided for a moment across her front window before disappearing into the darkness. Far beyond the trees, in the unlit stretch of road leading up to her property, a dark vehicle sat idling without headlights. The driver spoke into a radio, his voice low and professional. Target located, single adult and minor confirmed inside. Moving in 2 hours. Inside the house, Rhonda shifted in her sleep, sensing something even if she couldn't name it. Laya turned over in her bed, clutching her stuffed bear, unaware that somewhere out there, 6 men were checking their weapons and adjusting their night vision masks, preparing to breach a house they believed belonged to someone else. And above them all, the moon drifted silently across the sky, lighting the valley with its pale, indifferent glow. The night felt calm, too calm. The kind of calm that comes only before the storm. The first sound came just after 2 in the morning, a faint electrical pop, like a surge from somewhere deep in the walls. Then a quick pulse, barely audible, that made the house lights flicker. In her sleep, Rhonda stirred, her instincts whispering before her mind woke. The hum of the refrigerator stopped. The soft buzz from the security panel went dead. Silence fell again, thicker than before. She opened her eyes. For a moment, she didn't move. Years of discipline had taught her to wait, to listen. The air was still, yet something beneath it was wrong. She sat up slowly, every sense sharpening. A low vibration drifted from outside, the kind made by heavy boots moving in controlled rhythm. She reached for the phone beside her bed, but the screen stayed black. No signal, no light. Rhonda swung her legs over the bed, bare feet touching the cool floor. The moon through the curtains gave the room a dull silver hue. Down the hall, Laya's nightlight glowed faintly, a small island of safety. She moved silently to the window and pulled back a corner of the curtain. The driveway was empty, but she saw what her eyes had trained to notice. The faint shimmer of movement where there should be none. The bushes shifted without wind. Shadows detached themselves from darkness and crept toward her porch. A chill ran down her spine. It wasn't fear, it was calculation. She turned away from the window and went straight to Laya's room. The girl was asleep, her breathing steady, one arm curled around her stuffed bear. Rhonda touched her shoulder gently, whispering her name. Laya stirred, blinking in confusion. "Mom, what's wrong?" Quiet now, Ronda murmured. You need to listen carefully. Remember the game we practiced? When I say hide, you go into the little room and stay there until I come for you. No matter what you hear, understand? Laya nodded, her eyes wide now. Ronda kissed her forehead and opened the small panel built into the back of the closet. A hidden compartment she had installed months ago, lined with blankets and water bottles, something she'd hoped would never be used. Go, she said softly. As the girl crawled inside, Ronda felt a surge of cold resolve. She pulled the door shut and turned back toward the hall. Downstairs, wood splintered. The front door shook once, twice, then burst inward with a thunderous crash. Shouts followed, low and controlled. Overlapping commands barked in clipped phrases. Go, go, left clear! Target confirmed in structure! She moved down the hallway, staying low, her body remembering old patterns. Years of training came alive in her muscles. She grabbed the heavy flashlight from her nightstand, a solid metal mag light, and unscrewed the top just enough to dim its beam. Every instinct screamed for her to run, but she forced herself to think, identify, react, control. The stairwell glowed briefly as beams of light swept through. Figures in black armor moved with professional coordination. Two at the door, one covering the rear, one sweeping the living room. Their weapons weren't standard police issue. No badges, no visible insignia. One voice rose above the others. Second floor, we have movement. Ronda ducked back into the hallway just as a flashlight beam sliced across the stairs. She could hear their boots pounding up the steps. They were inside now, moving like they owned the place. She took a deep breath, then stepped into the open with her hands raised. Wait, don't shoot! The first man to reach the landing froze, weapon aimed squarely at her chest. Down! On your knees now! This is my house, she said, keeping her voice steady. There's a child here. You're making a mistake. The man didn't answer. Another figure appeared behind him, taller, heavier, his face hidden by a visor. Hands behind your head, he ordered. Do it! Ronda complied, lowering herself slowly to the floor. A boot pressed between her shoulder blades, forcing her down. The pressure on her spine was deliberate, cruel. Plastic cuffs tightened around her wrists until her fingers tingled. You have no right to be here, she said through clenched teeth. Quiet! The command came from the larger man. His voice was calm but cold, the voice of someone used to obedience. From the corner of her eye, she saw the faint gleam of a laser sight sliding along the hallway wall. She could hear the rest of the team spreading out through the bedrooms. Drawers opened, furniture scraped. The house she'd built as a sanctuary was being stripped apart by strangers. Where's the kid? One of them called. Ronda's blood froze. She twisted slightly, trying to see the speaker, but the boot on her back pressed harder. Stay down. She's not here, Ronda said quickly. There's no one else in the house. The tall man crouched beside her, his visor reflecting her own face. We'll see about that. He gestured, and one of his men moved toward Laya's room. Ronda's heart hammered. She knew they would find the closet door. The thought of one of them pulling her daughter out from hiding sent a surge of fury through her chest. She tried to stay calm, but something inside her snapped when she heard the faint scrape of boots near the child's door. Clear in here, the man started to say, but he didn't finish. Ronda moved. It was one smooth motion, instinct and precision combined. She twisted her hips, dislocating the man's balance. His boots slid, his weight shifted forward, and in that fraction of a second she drove her shoulder up and back, catching him under the chin. He stumbled, his hand slipping from his weapon. The plastic ties cut into her wrists, but she used the momentum, swinging her arms down hard against the edge of a dresser. The ties snapped. The second man shouted, raising his rifle. Ronda was already on her feet. The flashlight in her hand swung upward, cracking against his jaw. The sound was dull, heavy. He fell, the weapon clattering away. In the brief silence that followed, she could hear the others turning, realizing something had gone wrong. She snatched up the fallen rifle, flicked off the safety, and pressed herself against the wall. Boots thundered up the stairs. Team 2, report! She waited until the first silhouette appeared at the top of the steps, then swung the butt of the rifle into his helmet. The blow sent him tumbling backward, crashing into the one behind him. Both went down in a tangle of limbs and curses. The hallway was chaos now. Smoke from a shattered lamp, the smell of dust and sweat. Rhonda breathed through her nose, slow and steady. Her heart rate stayed controlled. She could hear Laya whimpering softly behind the wall, but the sound also fueled her. She had no choice now. These men weren't here to arrest her. They were here to silence her. A voice below shouted into a radio. "Command, we have resistance. Target is hostile." Hostile. The word ignited something deep in her chest. They had chosen the wrong house, the wrong woman. She moved through the hallway with controlled grace, clearing corners like she had taught hundreds of recruits to do. Every movement economical, precise. The fear had burned away, replaced by focus. Her body remembered what her mind didn't need to tell it. When the last of the intruders retreated toward the door, dragging an injured comrade, Rhonda stood at the top of the stairs, breathing hard. Her shirt was torn, her wrists raw, her knuckles bleeding. The silence that followed was deafening. She waited until she heard the sound of their truck's engine starting before lowering the rifle. The headlights cut across the driveway, then disappeared down the road. For a long moment she didn't move. The house smelled of sweat and dust and broken wood. Her muscles trembled from the aftershock of adrenaline. She dropped the rifle and leaned against the wall, her breath ragged but steadying. Then she went straight to Leia's room. She opened the secret door gently. The girl looked up, eyes wide, cheeks streaked with tears. "Is it over?" she whispered. "For now," Rhonda said. She pulled her daughter into her arms, holding her tightly. "But they'll come again." Outside, the night was quiet once more. Yet beneath that silence, she could already feel the tremor of what was coming next. Whoever they were, they hadn't made a mistake. They had made a decision. And by surviving, she had just become their problem. As she looked out the broken window, the moonlight glinted off the floor, where a single patch from one of the attackers lay torn. The letters stitched into it were faint but unmistakable. FD-07, Falcon Dynamics. The realization settled over her like ice. It wasn't over. The calm was gone. The storm had begun. The silence after the attack felt unnatural, as if the house itself had stopped breathing. Dust hung in the air, drifting through the pale light from the shattered window. Rhonda stood in the center of the living room, the rifle still heavy in her hands, her body trembling from the aftershock. Every muscle burned, her wrists raw from the broken cuffs, but her mind was crystal clear. She'd faced chaos before crowds, blood, pressure, but this was different. This was personal. Laya sat on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, clutching her stuffed bear so tightly her knuckles had turned white. The child's eyes followed every movement her mother made, silent, alert. Rhonda crouched beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You did perfect," she whispered. "You stayed quiet. I'm proud of you." The girl nodded, tears glistening in her lashes. "Are they coming back?" she asked. "Not tonight," Rhonda said, though she wasn't sure she believed it. She kissed her daughter's forehead. "But we need to be ready, always ready." She stood and moved to the hallway. The floor creaked under her steps, broken glass glittering like frost across the tiles. She felt the ache in her ribs, where a boot had pressed her down, the bruises on her arms from where they'd held her. Pain was just information. She cataloged it and kept moving. Years of competition had taught her to turn pain into focus. In the corner of the room lay one of the men she'd knocked unconscious. His helmet had rolled aside, revealing a shaved head and a scar that ran from temple to jaw. Rhonda knelt and checked his pulse steady. She wasn't here to kill anyone. She needed answers. She searched his gear methodically, finding a small earpiece, a radio, and a laminated card clipped to his vest. It was blank except for a string of digits and 2 letters. FD. She knew that abbreviation. It had haunted her inbox for months, Falcon Dynamics. Her stomach tightened. She glanced toward the front door, where another patch lay, torn and trampled. The same letters burned into the fabric. They hadn't been cops. They'd been contractors, private soldiers, hiding behind corporate paychecks. And if Falcon had sent them, it meant one thing. Someone wanted her silenced. The man on the floor groaned and shifted. Rhonda placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "Don't move," she said quietly. His eyes opened, unfocused at first, then wide with panic as he saw her face above him. You don't want to do this, he muttered, voice hoarse. You came into my home, she replied, her tone cold. You put a gun to my head and frightened my daughter. I want to know who sent you. He swallowed, glancing toward the window as if expecting rescue. We were told it was a recovery mission, that the target was armed, unstable. We had orders. Who gave them? I don't know. Command said clearance came from operations. That's all. Rhonda's patience thinned. She leaned closer, lowering her voice until it was a whisper. You're lying. You're too calm for a man who just got his team destroyed by a single woman. His jaw tightened. You're not supposed to be here, he said finally. The words hit her like a slap. Not supposed to be here. Her mind raced. They'd come for someone else, or claimed they had. But their precision said otherwise. They had known her name, her face, her layout. This was no accident. When she turned away, her pulse quickened with fury. She walked to the kitchen, opened a drawer, and pulled out a first aid kit. As she wrapped gauze around her wrist, her thoughts scattered like shards of glass. Falcon Dynamics. The message on her phone. The timing. It all connected. They'd used her once before, then cut her loose when she started asking questions, and now they wanted her erased. She looked at Laya, who had fallen asleep on the couch, exhaustion finally winning over fear. Rhonda's heart clenched. They hadn't just attacked her, they had invaded her sanctuary. She couldn't let that stand. She retrieved her old duffel bag from the closet, the one she hadn't touched since her last assignment. Inside was a compact pistol, a folded tactical vest, and a small waterproof notebook. The pages were filled with sketches of security layouts, field notes, emergency contacts, and code phrases. She flipped through it, stopping at one name. Darius Cole, former Marine, now an independent investigator. He'd once told her, if Falcon ever comes knocking, you run or you fight smart. She picked up her phone again, still dead. They'd used a jammer during the raid, probably still close enough to block the signal. She couldn't risk waiting. She switched on the emergency power unit hidden behind the kitchen cabinet, rerouting electricity to essential systems only. The cameras flickered back to life. On the screen, she replayed the last few minutes of footage before the blackout. 6 men approaching from the east, formation tight, pattern military. No license plates on their vehicle. She zoomed in on one of their shoulders. The camera caught a blurred tag with a faint barcode. She paused the frame, magnified it, and took a picture with a separate device. Evidence. Rhonda exhaled slowly, centering herself. Her mind fell into the familiar rhythm of preparation. No panic, no doubt. She checked the locks, reset the alarm manually, then reinforced the front door with the steel bar she kept for earthquakes. The house was secure for now. When dawn's first gray light seeped through the blinds, she made coffee, the mundane act grounding her. Her reflection in the window looked like a stranger. Disheveled hair, bruised face, eyes sharp as glass. She saw not the mother or the retired fighter, but the soldier she had once been, the one she had buried to live a peaceful life. The groan from the living room reminded her of the man she'd left bound there. She walked back, crouched beside him, and held the coffee mug inches from his face. You'll tell me everything, or I'll let the cops find you here with enough weapons to bury you for a decade. Either way, you're done. So talk. He hesitated, then nodded weakly. Falcon's been hiring freelancers, ex-military. We take orders through encrypted channels. I don't know the names, but I heard something. They said this operation was to contain a leak, someone who accessed restricted files. What files? He looked at her with a flicker of realization. Yours. They said you kept copies. Rhonda froze. Her mind replayed the encrypted folders she'd archived months ago after noticing anomalies in Falcon's payroll, records duplicate accounts, off-the-books shipments. She'd stored them as a precaution, never thinking they'd notice. Now it was clear. They had. She stood, gripping the mug so hard her knuckles whitened. You can tell your boss, she said quietly, that he just made the worst mistake of his life. By mid-morning, she had dragged the unconscious intruder to his truck at the edge of the property and left him there, stripped of his weapons. She wiped her fingerprints from everything. Let them wonder what had happened. Let them be afraid. Inside, Laya woke and found her mother staring out the window again. "Are we leaving?" the girl asked, voice small. "Not yet," Rhonda said. "We have something to finish first." She went to the office and opened her laptop, connecting to a hidden network through an old military protocol. The encrypted files appeared on the screen like ghosts from another life. She scanned through them, quickly contracts, training rosters, off-site shipments marked classified. Every line was proof that Falcon Dynamics was doing more than private security work. Her pulse steadied as the sun climbed higher. The fear was gone now. The hesitation, too. What remained was focus, the same unyielding drive that had carried her through every fight, every mission, every loss. Ronda Rousey had tried to live quietly. She had tried to be just a mother, but they had come into her home, threatened her child, and in doing so, they had awakened something she'd buried long ago. As she closed the laptop, she whispered to herself, "They wanted a fighter. Now they'll have one." Outside, a bird called in the distance, its song sharp against the morning air. The day looked ordinary, peaceful even. Yet beneath that calm, something irreversible had shifted. Rhonda could feel it in the rhythm of her heartbeat. The next time they came, she would be ready, and this time, she wouldn't be defending. She would be hunting. By the next evening, the house had turned into something between a war zone and a crime scene. Every step Rhonda took echoed with the memory of the night before. The thud of boots, the crash of doors, the harsh rhythm of her own pulse as she fought for survival. She had cleaned most of the broken glass and sealed the splintered door with a steel brace, but no amount of fixing could erase the feel of intrusion. The smell of gun oil still lingered in the air. The walls seemed to hold their breath, waiting for something worse. Laya sat at the table drawing quietly while Rhonda moved through the kitchen, methodically checking the list she'd written in her mind. Water, food, fuel, communications, escape routes. Her daughter's resilience amazed her. Though shaken, the girl seemed to sense her mother's controlled calm and mirrored it. But Rhonda could see the shadows under her eyes, the way her small hands trembled slightly when the house creaked. "Mom, will they come back?" Laya asked without looking up. Rhonda placed a hand on her shoulder. "Not if I can help it," she said softly. She had been awake most of the night, sifting through the encrypted files she'd kept hidden since her work with Falcon Dynamics. What she'd found now left no doubt they weren't just a security contractor. They were laundering money through military supply routes, falsifying training reports, and selling equipment off the books to unauthorized groups overseas. She had stumbled into something massive, and someone high up had realized it too late to silence her quietly. She sat at her desk, scrolling through line after line of digital evidence. Each document she opened felt like a nail in the coffin of her old life. Her name was in some of them: training supervisor, consultant, signature on safety audits. If Falcon went down, they could twist the story to make her look complicit. That was the real reason for the raid. She wasn't an enemy combatant or a suspect. She was a liability. When she heard the soft knock at the back door, her muscles tensed. She reached for her gun, moving silently through the hall. The knock came again. 3 short taps, 1 pause, then 2. It was an old signal from her Marine training days, one she hadn't heard in years. She hesitated, then opened the door an inch. "Darius?" she whispered. The man outside was older than she remembered. Beard gray, shoulders stooped, but his eyes were the same, sharp, assessing. "You really know how to make headlines, Rousey," he said, stepping in quickly as she locked the door behind him. "I didn't call anyone," she said. "I know, but when 6 men in unmarked armor get dragged out of your driveway at dawn, it tends to get around." He looked her over. "You okay?" "Alive. That's enough for now." He dropped his duffel on the floor, unzipping it to reveal a laptop, portable hard drives, and a stack of burner phones. "Tell me what you have." For the next hour, they worked side by side. Rhonda transferred her encrypted files, showing him transaction records, contractor rosters, and photos of the patches she'd taken from the men who attacked her. Darius watched in silence, the faint blue light from the screen reflecting off his glasses. "This is bad," he muttered finally. "Worse than I thought. Falcon's been under quiet investigation for months, but someone's been pulling strings to keep it buried. You were never supposed to see this." "Well, I did," she said, "and they came for me because of it." He rubbed his temples. You realize what you're sitting on? These files could bring down half a dozen contracts tied to the Department of Defense. That's billions of dollars. People have disappeared over less. Rhonda's jaw tightened. I'm not disappearing. He looked at her, half admiring, half exasperated. Then you'd better be smarter than the people chasing you. As he spoke, Laya appeared in the doorway, clutching her stuffed bear. Mom, who's this? Rhonda's voice softened. This is Darius. He's an old friend. He's here to help. Darius gave the girl a small smile. Hey there, champ. Then to Rhonda, he added in a lower tone. She shouldn't be here when this goes down. I'm not leaving her, Rhonda said firmly. Not again. He didn't argue, but his expression said enough. He opened one of the hard drives and began copying files. I'll get this to someone inside the Bureau who still remembers what integrity means. But you can't stay here. Falcon will send more people. They'll make it look like a robbery gone wrong this time. Rhonda nodded slowly, thinking. Then we make them come early, she said. On my terms. He looked up sharply. You want to draw them out? I want to end it, she said. They think I'm just some ex-fighter who got lucky last night. Let's show them what they're really up against. Darius exhaled through his nose. You haven't changed. I had to, she replied, but that part of me never died. It just slept. They spent the next several hours preparing. Rhonda walked Darius through the house's layout, showing him the choke points and blind spots. She used furniture to narrow hallways, positioned mirrors to reflect light from her emergency flood lamp, and rigged simple traps with wires and noise sensors. Every move was deliberate. She had turned her home into a controlled battlefield. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Darius loaded the last of the data onto his encrypted drive. I'll get this out, he said. If I'm not back in 24 hours, you will be, Rhonda interrupted. And when you are, we'll finish this together. He gave a brief nod and slipped out through the back, vanishing into the trees. Rhonda stood for a long moment at the window, watching the shadows lengthen. The quiet of dusk pressed down like a weight. When Laya came to stand beside her, Rhonda wrapped an arm around her. I know you're scared, she said softly, but we're going to be okay. You just have to trust me. I do, Laya said. But why are they doing this? Because some people think power means never getting caught. The child nodded slowly, not fully understanding, but comforted by her mother's steady voice. Later that night, when Laya was asleep, Rhonda returned to her desk. She opened the laptop again, scanning the files until one line caught her attention, an internal memo marked Phase 2, Containment. The timestamp was from 2 days before the attack. The details were chillingly familiar. Target located, female, trained, potential whistleblower. Eliminate evidence and ensure silence. The authorization code was signed by someone she once shook hands with, a vice president at Falcon Dynamics. Her eyes darkened. She read the line again, each word driving deeper into her chest. There was no misunderstanding now. She wasn't collateral damage. She was the target. Outside, the wind rose, carrying the scent of rain. Rhonda shut the laptop. Her reflection ghosted in the dark screen. Tomorrow would bring another fight, one unlike any she'd faced before, but she was ready. The woman they had tried to break was gone. In her place stood the fighter who never stayed down. As lightning flashed across the horizon, she whispered to the empty room, You wanted silence. You're about to hear me loud and clear. The storm that had threatened all day finally arrived with the darkness. Rain lashed against the roof, streaking down the windows like the sky itself was trying to wash the house away. Rhonda stood by the window, watching lightning tear across the horizon. Each flash illuminated the yard, the fence line, and the distant road that wound down toward the valley. Somewhere beyond that rain-soaked blackness, she knew they were coming. She had spent every hour since Darius left turning her home into a fortress. The furniture had been moved to block doorways, mirrors angled to catch light, and wires stretched low near the stairs to trip anyone rushing in. She had laid out every weapon she had, her old service pistol, a combat knife, the mag light, even a steel baton from her UFC training days. Every piece of her plan was simple, efficient, brutal. At 3:50 a.m., her body woke her before her mind did. A change in the air, the faint static of movement like instinct calling her name. She slipped from bed, careful not to wake Laya, who was asleep in the closet again, hidden behind blankets. Rhonda crouched beside her, brushed the child's hair from her forehead, and whispered, "Don't come out until I say so." Then she crossed to the window. The rain had stopped, too suddenly. The air outside was thick, the kind that amplifies every sound. And in that silence, she heard it, the crunch of tires on wet gravel. Her heart didn't race. It slowed. She felt the same icy focus that used to hit seconds before stepping into the cage. Every thought sharpened. Every sound mattered. She moved through the dark house without turning on a light. A beam of headlights passed across the yard, then cut off. She crouched near the front door, listening. Boots again. Heavier this time. Not 6, but more. 8, maybe 10. And these men weren't amateurs. Their formation was clean, disciplined. They'd learned from last time. Through the peephole, she saw the reflection of gunmetal and visors. Thermal imaging lenses. They were reading the house, watching for heat signatures. Rhonda exhaled slowly and stepped away from the door. She flipped the breaker in the hallway, killing what little power remained. The house dropped into darkness. Outside, one of the men spoke into his mic. "Alpha team in position. Execute in 30." 30 seconds. She moved like water, silent, invisible, positioning herself behind the living room archway. She held her pistol low and tight against her chest, the way she'd been taught to minimize her silhouette. She could hear her own heartbeat, slow and steady. The explosion came as a muffled crack, the front door blown open by a small charge. Smoke filled the hallway. Laser sights cut through the fog, red and green beams dancing across the walls. The first man entered fast, rifle up. Rhonda let him pass the threshold, then swung the maglite hard against the back of his neck. He went down instantly, limp. She caught his weapon before it hit the ground, switched to safety, and rolled behind the couch. Shouts erupted. "Contact front! 2 down!" Honing. She wasn't sure who the second was until she heard a sharp click from one of her traps, the tripwire she'd rigged by the staircase. A flash of light, a bang, then silence. Another down. They started shooting blind, rounds tearing into walls and furniture. Splinters showered over her. She crawled along the floor, feeling each vibration through her palms. She'd trained her whole life for precision, but this was something deeper, pure survival fused with experience. When one of them stepped too close, she rose behind him like a shadow, wrapping her arm around his throat. The struggle was brief. She dropped him silently and took his comm earpiece. Voices buzzed through it. Breach point secured. Negative on visual. Target may have moved to secondary level. Rhonda spoke softly into the mic. Secondary level clear. Proceeding to containment. The channel clicked twice in acknowledgement. It bought her a few precious seconds. She used them to move upstairs, barricading the hall with a dresser. Rain began again outside, harder now, masking the sound of movement. When she reached the closet, Laya was awake, wide-eyed, clutching her bear. Rhonda knelt and cupped her face. "It's almost over," she whispered. "Cover your ears." She kissed her daughter's forehead, then shut the panel. The next wave came faster, 2 men climbing the stairs in perfect sync. Rhonda waited until they were halfway up, then shoved the dresser forward with all her weight. The furniture crashed down, taking both with it. She jumped the railing, landing in a crouch, her knee jarring but holding. The men on the floor groaned. She finished them with the butt of her pistol, sharp and efficient. One remained. She knew it even before the faint click came from behind her. "Don't move," a voice said. She turned slowly, hands raised. The man was tall, built like a wall, his rifle steady. Through the mask, she saw pale eyes, cold and precise. "You're good," he said, "but this ends now." Rhonda tilted her head. "You think so?" "I don't think. I know. Orders were clear." "And who gave them?" she asked, buying time. He hesitated. "You already know." "Then tell me his name. I like to know who's about to die." He barely flinched before pulling the trigger, but she was faster. She twisted sideways, the shot grazing her arm. She lunged, grabbed the barrel, forced it upward, and drove her elbow into his throat. He staggered, wheezing. The fight turned primal close quarters, violent, raw. He swung the rifle. She ducked, countered with a knee to his ribs, then a shoulder throw that sent him crashing through the coffee table. The sound of glass shattering filled the room. He reached for a sidearm. She kicked it away, caught his arm, and locked it in an armbar. The bone snapped cleanly. His scream drowned beneath the thunder outside. She stood over him, chest heaving. "Who sent you?" He spat blood. "Karen, Michael Karen. He runs Falcon now. You shouldn't have opened your mouth." "Looks like you opened yours first." She hit him once, hard enough to knock him out. Then she ripped the ID patch from his vest and dropped it into her pocket. Evidence. Proof. The rain beat harder against the house as she leaned back against the wall, catching her breath. Her whole body ached, but her mind was steady. When the last engine outside roared to life, she knew the rest had retreated. They'd seen enough. Or maybe they thought she was dead. Either way, she had survived the second storm. She went upstairs, opened the closet, and found Laya sitting where she had left her. The little girl's eyes were wet, but her hands were steady. Ronda scooped her up, pressing her close. "It's over," she whispered. "Did you win?" Ronda hesitated, looking around at the wreckage. The splintered furniture, the broken walls, the smell of gunpowder thick in the air. "We're still standing," she said. "That's what matters." By dawn, the rain stopped again. The world outside was gray, quiet, almost peaceful. But the fight inside her wasn't over. As she stood on the porch watching the first pale light creep across the sky, she felt no victory, only purpose. They had taken her peace. They had endangered her child. Now she had proof: Karen's name, the files, the patches, the recordings. The next move would be hers. She turned back toward the house where Laya waited with sleepy eyes and a blanket around her shoulders. Ronda knelt beside her, smoothing the child's hair. "Pack your things," she said gently. "We're leaving soon." "Where are we going?" "Somewhere safe," she answered. "But first I have to pay someone a visit." And as the morning broke over the shattered home, Ronda Rousey, fighter, mother, and now hunter, felt the storm inside her settle into something colder, sharper. Retribution had begun, and she intended to see it through to the end. The sky was pale gray when Ronda finally stepped out of what was left of her home. The rain had washed away most of the blood, though not the memory of what had happened there. Her yard was littered with broken glass, torn fabric, and the faint metallic smell of gunfire that lingered even in the morning air. She looked down the long dirt road where the second assault team had retreated, her expression unreadable. The sun was beginning to rise, faint orange streaks breaking through the mist, but the light felt empty. Inside, Laya sat at the kitchen table with a blanket wrapped around her, sipping warm milk. She looked small and fragile, but her eyes followed her mother's movements with the same silent intensity as always. Ronda returned to her, crouching beside her chair. "We're leaving soon," she said softly. "There's nothing left for us here." "Are they gone?" Laya asked. "For now." Ronda brushed the girl's hair back gently. "But we're not going to wait for them to come again." She stood and began gathering what little remained intact: her duffel bag with documents, the flash drive with Falcon Dynamics files, a change of clothes, and the pistol she'd cleaned that morning. The power was still out, the house quiet except for the soft sound of water dripping through a cracked ceiling beam. When she passed through the living room, she stopped to look at the broken photo frame on the floor, her and Laya smiling at the beach, a memory from another lifetime. She picked it up, wiped the glass, and tucked it into her bag. By the time the first police vehicles arrived, sirens blaring faintly in the distance, Ronda had already decided what she would and wouldn't say. She waited for them on the porch, hands visible, face calm. The first officer to step out was young, barely 30, his eyes widening when he recognized her. "Ma'am, are you Ronda Rousey?" "I was," she said. "Now I'm just a woman who wants to file a report." The officer's partner surveyed the wreckage, exchanging a look of disbelief. "What happened here?" Ronda's voice was steady, almost detached. "Home invasion, multiple assailants. They're gone now." They began asking questions: how many, what weapons, whether she'd seen their faces. She gave short, factual answers. Nothing about Falcon Dynamics, nothing about Darius or the files. When one of the detectives mentioned the federal task force investigating private contractors, she only nodded, as if hearing it for the first time. Hours later, when the sun had fully risen and the yard was swarming with law enforcement and forensics teams? Rhonda and Laya sat in the back of an ambulance. A paramedic dabbed antiseptic on the cut along Rhonda's arm. "You should probably go to a hospital," he said. "You might need stitches." "I'll be fine," she answered. The paramedic gave a small shrug. "You look like you've been through hell." She met his eyes. "Hell's been through me. I'm still standing." He didn't reply, just gave a quiet nod and walked away. A familiar black SUV pulled into the driveway then, its tires crunching on wet gravel. Two men in dark suits stepped out, their badges flashing in the morning light. The older of the two introduced himself as Agent Paul Renner from the FBI. "Ms. Rousey, we've been trying to reach you," he said. "We'd like to ask a few questions about Falcon Dynamics." Her expression didn't change. "I figured this was coming." Renner glanced at the ruins of her home. "Looks like someone wanted to keep you quiet." "They failed." He studied her for a moment, then nodded toward the SUV. "We have a safe location where you and your daughter can stay. Witness protection, at least temporarily. But we'll need whatever you've got, files, evidence, anything that connects Falcon to the attacks." Rhonda reached into her bag and pulled out the flash drive. "This has everything," she said. "But I want your word it won't disappear into another file room." "You have it," Renner said, taking it carefully. "You've done the right thing." She looked past him toward the hills where the light was turning golden. The right thing usually comes at a cost. As the agents talked to the police and began loading evidence into their vehicle, Rhonda walked over to where Laya was waiting. The girl looked tired, but when she saw her mother, she smiled faintly. "Are we going now?" "Yes," Rhonda said, lifting her into her arms. "We're going." They followed the agents to the SUV. Before getting in, Rhonda turned back one last time. The house stood battered but unbroken, its frame outlined against the rising sun. For a moment she imagined the life she had tried to build there, the quiet mornings, the laughter, the peace that had seemed so real. Then she let it go. The drive toward the city was long and silent. Laya fell asleep with her head against Rhonda's shoulder, her small hand clutching the edge of her mother's sleeve. Agent Renner sat in the front, speaking quietly into his phone. As the miles passed, Rhonda's reflection in the window hardened from exhaustion into purpose. She had given them the proof they needed, but she knew Falcon Dynamics wouldn't fall easily. Men like Michael Caron didn't surrender. They retaliated. When they reached the Bureau's temporary safe house, a modest two-story building tucked into a quiet neighborhood, Renner escorted them inside. "You'll be safe here," he said. "We've got agents posted nearby. Rest for now." Rhonda nodded but didn't sit. "When will you move on Caron?" "As soon as we verify your evidence. It's enough to start." She looked out the window again, watching a bird land on the fence outside. For the first time in days, she allowed herself a small, weary smile. "Then start fast." Later that evening, she stood by the window while Laya slept on the couch behind her. The television in the corner played the news, low and distant. The anchor's voice carried the words she had been waiting to hear. "The Department of Justice has announced the arrest of Michael Caron, CEO of Falcon Dynamics, in connection with multiple counts of fraud, bribery, and conspiracy. Sources claim federal agents recovered classified data linking the company to illegal military operations abroad." Rhonda closed her eyes, exhaling slowly. She should have felt relief, but what she felt instead was a quiet emptiness, the strange stillness that comes after surviving too much. Justice was never clean. It came with blood and scars and sleepless nights. A faint sound drew her attention, the creak of the couch as Laya stirred. The girl blinked sleepily. "Mom, is it really over now?" Rhonda turned to her, her expression softening. "Yes," she said. "It's over." Laya smiled and drifted back to sleep, her breathing even. Rhonda watched her for a long time, then sat beside her, resting her hand gently on the child's hair. Outside, dawn was breaking again, this time not gray but gold, the kind of light that promised a new beginning. She thought of all she'd lost, her home, her peace, her anonymity. But she had her daughter, her strength, and her will. Those were things no one could take. As she looked toward the horizon, she whispered to herself, "I wanted quiet, but maybe peace is in silence. Maybe it's knowing they'll never touch us again." And with that, she closed her eyes for the first real rest she'd had in days. the morning light spilling across her face like the beginning of something new. If you want to see what happens next, don't miss what's coming. Subscribe now, turn on the notifications, and watch our next story before anyone else. Share this video with your friends and tell us in the comments where you're watching from, because the fight for justice has only just begun.